Forget. Cool. Well, this is the January 19th, 2023 Kubernetes SIG Network meeting. We are here to the CNCF Code of Conduct, which boils down to don't be mean. We record these meetings and post them up on YouTube for your records. And we do have a few items on the agenda, quite a bit agenda items. So we might have to time box everybody to about 10 to 15 minutes to get through everything. And why don't we kick it off? It looks like we have triage on the books. And Tim, are you gonna take that?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can
Yes.
hear and see.
I got the sound right this time. Yes, good. Well, the good news is triage is short today, so we give you some time back. I only have two issues that I thought were worth talking about, neither one of which is particularly egregious. First issue, and as usual, thank you for everybody who did pre-triage. First issue is somebody reporting ingress class and ingress class name annotation can't both be set at the same time, except they can through update, they can't through create. And so clearly at some point, somebody thought it was important that we not allow both, but they have a use case where they have different controllers that look at different parts of it. And so this customer really wants both. My feeling is I don't see a reason why we should actively disallow it, but maybe we should send back a warning for them. And I wanted to see if anybody like vehemently disagrees.
Why
I don't feel that.
Okay, go Rob.
Yeah, I don't feel that strongly about it at this point. I know back in the day, we were really trying to push people to move to the new thing and at the very least not use the new and old thing together, because using the new and old thing together, it gets complicated if you're a controller author, which thing you should use. That using both at the same time was meant as a transition step, not a you should create things that are brand new with both new and old values. But at this point, it's been long enough. If you really still need it at this point, I can't argue with that. It's, it's fine.
Antonio?
Well, why did you say there are two controllers?
They said they have the actual ingress controller, and they're using external DNS at the same time that are both looking at ingress. So their external DNS isn't backrev and is still using the old annotation. At this point, like the user is taking responsibility for making sure that they mean the same thing. I think sending back an API warning is a reasonable answer, and saying, yeah, you own it, you're doing it.
But the bug is in the external DNS. They have to do that because the external DNS doesn't check the field. So it's still working. Okay.
Yeah. So they're saying like their life cycle, they're still creating ingresses and they can't create them. So they have to create it and then do an update to it to set the second field.
Because external DNS is not using the new API.
Sure, but even if they fixed external DNS right now, like who knows how long until a release and how long until a customer adopts it.
Okay. No, I'm trying to understand the bug. So I understand that we facilitate the life of the people that have to use this control. But I wanted to understand if it was a fault in Kubernetes or is that because of the other component.
Who do we expect to do the API warning PR? Try to get submitter to do it, or somebody here? It looked like it was non-trivial, but not terrible.
Oh, really? It should be trivial, shouldn't it? Like
I mean, the API warning stuff is going to be somewhere else than validation, right? And we can't return an error from validation, so we'd have to do another check for it potentially in whatever the storage bits and API server are that handle it.
Yes, you're right. Okay. It'd be a different block of code, but it should really be like 4 lines of code.
All right, the only reference I saw was endpoints also had a warning, and that was about it. And it wasn't clear to me where. I mean, anyway, it doesn't matter. But yeah, it's going to be
adding a lot of warnings lately.
Okay.
and they really are pretty straightforward,
Okay,
right?
cool.
It's really an if condition and a return a string. Like there's not a whole lot of structure there.
Okay.
Cool, thank you. And the second one to look at is this poor user who has run out of cluster cider. They did follow up, and they have a /16 cluster cider and a node mask of 24, and they're in the 200 nodes range, and they're out of pod IP space, and are asking what to do, and the only answer I was able to give them is you can grow your cluster cider into the next adjacent space, but I've never done that myself. Like in theory, it would work. I don't know if anybody here has done that, like and actively says, yeah, that's okay.
I mean, it totally depends on the network plugin, because you might need to restart the network plugin on every node or whatever.
Good point.
If
I've
he's
done
I mean,
this,
is this-
with Calico, and I increased it. Nothing came up with the new stuff. I restarted stuff enough times, it eventually started working. It was not nice.
Do they say who they're using? No, they don't even say which plugins they're using.
they can switch to cider cluster ciders, right? As well. Look into that.
Is that though they're on a back rev? I think they said they were on like 22 or something.
I mean, they can switch to cluster ciders, the object that was introduced in, I think it's in beta, if not mistaken though. Oh, it's 119. Yeah.
Yeah, they're
Okay,
super
never mind.
back rev.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
it's like
never mind.
several years old. And you know, usually we say, oh, it's too old, we can't help you. But like, I feel really bad that there are people in production who are running into these issues, and I'm seeking to try to help them if we can, without, you know, backporting whole API changes by 6 revisions.
I mean, that said, there's not a lot we can do with this other than say, try it maybe. And if there's a bug, file a bug report.
Yeah,
Right.
it's on their production cluster. I'm basically, I brought it here because I wanted to see if anybody was like, no, I've done that, it's cool, right?
I would just say, if you really feel bad for him, then maybe we need a cap about, because we've been talking about this forever, right? Like how it ought to be possible.
To add more cluster ciders, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we have an API now to add more cluster ciders. So like that works in like 25, 26, 27, not in 19, right? So the question here is like, can we do anything for somebody who's back rev? And
The official answer should of course be upgrade to, then you have the APIs, and then otherwise try this. I mean, it's like I said, it depends completely on the network objects you use underneath. I mean, what is your CNI going to do?
Yeah. This is why I'm sort of.
I'm scared if in the production you might not be able to grow your mask, right?
Yes. This is why
Also,
I'm
it's what is the CNI going to do in a version this old? Is the other question.
right. So that's why I'm qualifying all my recommendations to them, and yet I still feel like I want to try to help them. So I didn't get the answer that I was hoping for, but I will follow up here with, the fact that we talked about it and that you may need to restart the network plugins. I'm going to recommend that they try bringing it up in a separate cluster and moving things over, which is also a very complicated answer, but could solve the upgrade problem at the same time. Maybe this gives them the incentive they need to upgrade. Okay, that's it for triage. I did want to give a little like homework for everybody regarding triage. I had some fun doing some spelunking through old issues. I would like to ask everybody to participate in our backlog grooming. And so for next session, it would be great. Everybody bring one issue, like go look at our old issues. Just bring one issue here that we can talk about, whether it's, should we close this, or I think this is implemented, but I'm not sure, or, oh, this seems like a real problem. How come we never got to this? Those sorts of issues, just that we can look at. Just find one that we can talk about. Is that fair? Am I asking too much? Just one issue. Go back into the depths of our history and see some of these sort of embarrassing issues that are still opening.
So
Open.
separate meeting for the grooming or at?
No, we just do it. We'll do it here
Okay.
in 2 weeks' time. All right, I yield the floor.
Sweet deal. Cool. We have homework. That'll be fun. I think next up is multi-network. So we're going to be discussing the names here. So if you want to go ahead and take it.
Yeah, hi everyone. Yeah, naming is a hard thing. In multi-network community, we start talking about the name for the object that we would like to introduce with this effort. The TLDR, I don't want to take much of the time. So TLDR, we wish to add a new object that it will be something that's going to represent networking, the pod networks to which a pod can reference. Of course, this object will be later on as well, could be referenced by some other objects. We are hoping this can become like a core object in Kubernetes. There is a bunch of proposals, and I just want to kind of get a feel of the community. One of the proposals I think that stood out was KNet. And what is the thinking about that name? And just to maybe add a kind of obvious name like network was proposed, but the kind of we are not kind of leaning towards that one is because it's very overloaded term in like common discussion with anyone on the about networking. You would always have to add what network you have in mind, right? So network is not the kind of the best candidate for us. So that's why we kind of trying to move away from that guy. Any other proposals? There is a link in the minutes of in the minutes. There is a link to our minutes where we have some some proposals over there. We have, I think, few minutes. I think I wrapped up quite nicely. Any thoughts on the KNet name?
Yeah, I would really strongly suggest we not do things that can confuse us with the traditional Kubernetes networking. So KNet, I've known a lot of places where people will talk about the Kubernetes networking as meaning what we actually have currently, and picking a name that's going to confuse that, I think, is going to be just a mess.
What do you have in mind? Because what we are trying to build is going to be the Kubernetes, the definition and description of Kubernetes networking.
Right, but that's not what most people think about as Kubernetes networking. What they think about is the current definition that we have, which is not a low-level definition, right? What people think about is I have layer 3 connectivity between all of my pods without NAT. I have this network policy thing that allows me to do isolation. I have Kubernetes services that allow me to do some kind of load balancing. That's what people think about in terms of Kubernetes networking. I really don't think that we should be hijacking those conceptual norms in terms of naming other things, right? Because names have power. They shape how you think about things, and they also can sow confusion. And so I would really strongly suggest not doing something that's going to sow confusion.
But this networks is just these networks are going to be multiplying the current network. So the goal is the current network, the one that you're describing, to have more of this.
Well, but effectively what I think I hear you saying is you would like to redo the entire semantic definition of what people think of as Kubernetes networking, is what I think I'm just heard you say.
No, I want to. Right now, we don't have any object describing the current net, just the connectivity piece, because you're bunching.
But that's actually
everything.
A good thing.
Everything. No. But you're clumping, bundling everything that services network policies to one term networking. This is not what it is. This is the piece of connectivity of the pod. So basically.
Let me sort of harken back, right? Every talk that I see anywhere that someone gives about Kubernetes networking, like I think you've literally given the canonical version of this talk, Tim, right? It's you sit down and you talk about Kubernetes networking in terms of these things. One of the things that Kubernetes has gotten extraordinarily right is we've moved away from the Cloud 1.0 dysfunction. In Cloud 1.0, everybody took all the physical objects, they slapped a V in front of them and they called it good, right? And so we carried all the physical concepts over. Now, one of the beautiful things about Kubernetes networking is it doesn't do that, right? One of the things that I will sometimes say with great satisfaction is that with a very small number of exceptions, you don't even find IP addresses in Kubernetes networking API because users don't care. And so I would suggest if you're trying to rethink Kubernetes networking in a way that makes users care about low-level concepts, we certainly don't want that confused with the beautiful thing that we have currently.
I think you're kind of going into details of what it will mean. I think you did look at, I saw some comments from you today on the requirements that we have, and you can see that I think we want to have a representation of how we are connecting pod to something.
Right, but this is
Well,
the
and whatever,
same,
however,
this is the same document
however
we've
it
seen
is
for the last 5 years.
it
right?
is however it is implemented, and this is not nothing. And however you do your IP story, and it's nothing about it. Just represent one, because there is no representation of how you connect pod today.
Right,
So-
because users don't.
But I think we agree on a few things. We don't want to call it network, and I don't want to call it network attachment definition. And sort of, so what is it we're trying to describe? I mean, is it, so we said, okay, it's what a pod attaches to. Is that a network? I mean, we had this discussion before, right? When, I mean, Ed introduced the terms, then I also talked about L2 and L3. You used IP and Ethernet, right? I think it was that you're using, right? I mean, that when L2/Ethernet is basically a network string that you use over all the nodes and attach to. But I mean, this sort of, it's a problem. Sort of, first is like, what is it we're modeling? And if it is a network, okay, then we need to give it a name. But is it different type of networks? I mean, we said Ethernet IP or L2, L3. What is it really trying to model? And I think that's what Ed really was saying. What are we trying to model? And how do we give them the appropriate name so we don't go back and use call it the same type of things that we did in OpenStack.
Well, and how do we not confuse existing users of what we have? I'm sorry, like.
Yeah, so one way would be to start saying, so part of the multi-networking proposal is also to be able to have a parallel cluster or cluster networks or pod networks, right, where you can have different namespaces using different cluster networks. How would we describe that? Sort of, if we need to conceptualize these things, maybe we should start conceptualizing what's there and then expand on that instead of trying to plug in the new and then convert when it comes to coming up with these names. I mean, one of the reasons we call it the object was that we could not agree on what to call it, right? We didn't find something that was good. So are we too early? Is it better to try to describe this ability to, because I mean, the cluster network, right? What you have is connectivity. And you can realize that connectivity in many ways. It can be realized by one long L2, where it can be an L2 per node, or not any networks at all that you attach to the pod, right? It could be one network for every pod that attaches to a vRouter. It's up to the implementation that brings the networking that brings this in. And that makes it a little hard. And so are we pushing in concepts and locking things in and then sort of putting things in boxes that maybe doesn't have to be there.
So in Kubernetes, we have two basic categories of resources. We have resources that are authoritative. When you create them, they cause things to happen. And we have resources that are representative, that model something that already exists, right? Nodes are the latter, right? If you delete a node, it doesn't make your VM go away, right? That's an intentional decision. Sometimes I regret it, but it is intentional. Whereas if you delete a pod, it does make your workload go away, right? Which pattern does this thing follow? I think it's the latter, right? This model.
It would be the latter, yeah. You cannot delete interface, let's say, from the node, right?
Right.
It's similar. It's a representation of the resource, right?
So creating a network or whatever we're going to call it doesn't cause a thing to come to be, right? So
but
at the
depending
same
on the
time,
implementation,
if you delete it,
yes.
what's going to happen? Like if you delete the representation, that doesn't delete the underlying thing, but that's a signal to the rest of the
I'm
stuff
only
register.
raising this issue. I raised this issue only to put the seed in for the discussion. Like as you're thinking about names, naming is hard and I'm terrible at it, but as you're thinking about it, like this is a representation, a model, an external, an other, right? Like let those words sort of permeate your thoughts. For the sake of time, I think I don't think we can have this full discussion here. Mache, what you should probably do is open an issue or make a Google Forms or something and send it to the discussion. Include a blurb about, you know, what you said before, like this is what we're looking for, and make it a brainstorm. Like there's no dumb answers here. Like just solicit suggestions for names and then we can discuss the collected set later.
So yeah, I was thinking about like some sort of form, but you know, form can be manipulated as well. Politics, you know. Basically, I am trying to capture the candidates. That's where I'm trying to get. So let with the community in our meeting, we will try to gather and identify the candidates, and then yes, I will send out the form.
The best,
give it a temporary name because I still think that we need to describe what these objects are before we know what the name is, and sort of describe what is it we're modeling. And sort of we saw when we did the, I mean, call it the, from the plumbing group, right? There we have L2 networks that we stretch out that you can attach to, right? I think Ed was very convincing when he brought up the arguments for that we should have more than that. We should be able to have a more complex network set that offers connectivity, like an L3 service. And
yeah, I will go so far as to say that one of the absolutely smartest things in Kubernetes, the thing that impressed me about its networking the very first time I encountered it, is that L2 is not a concept in Kubernetes.
Oh, yeah.
The cloud needs L2 like it needs a hole in the head.
I need L2, but I don't want it to be the only way to offer. And you got through with your points there very clearly to me.
The other thing I'd suggest, Mache, is see if you can tighten up what the definition of network is as defined by the KEP or the document that you have. You know, I reread the initial bit there in the document, and it still seems a little bit too long if we want to have a concise discussion around what the name of that thing that we are trying to describe should be. Like, is there a 2-sentence definition of what this object is supposed to be?
Yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah.
But I also like Tim said, let's go do brainstorming. I mean, it is connectivity talking about. Networks can be used to offer connectivity, but I mean, can we describe it in a different way?
The best part about brainstorming is the lack of judgment. Like you can just throw names in, and when somebody mentions one name, you'll say, oh, that's interesting. Let me riff on that idea and throw some more names out. So, you know, we've done this rather successfully in like SIG multi-cluster, coming up with names, or at least weeding out names. In the end, we had enough good candidates that we had to make a choice. But I would say that that's the path forward for you. And yes, time check.
Yep. Thanks, everyone. I captured some of the kind of proposals from the chat. So yeah, we would keep going. Thanks for the feedback.
Sweet deal. Yeah, that'll be cool to continue in the multi-network chat. Sweet. Rob, you have 3 agenda items. Hopefully get that between 10, 15 minutes and give Antonio 10 to 15 minutes.
Yeah, no, I think all of these will be pretty quick. The first one, I wanted to just reference a doc that describes some changes we're considering in Gateway API that would remove the concept of beta. So we would basically have 2 states. There would be a off by default and experimental, and a on by default and stable, and not an intermediate state of on by default, but not quite stable. Interested in feedback here. I sent this out to the mailing list. We'll also get some feedback on from SIG Arch on this. So far seems to be mostly positive feedback from what I've heard, but I would love to, get a broader perspective here. This is CRD based API, and it's especially expensive to add new API versions. It takes several releases to get rid of old API versions once you've added a new one, and to do that full transition. And I'm not sure how much value it really adds. So anyway, that's a thing that's open for discussion. I'll give just a minute or two if anyone on the meeting has comments, feedback on that idea. I'll say I'll take silence as just everyone loves the idea, and I'll run with that. Okay. All right.
Rob,
next up,
I talked to you about this before. I don't object to it. My feeling here is you guys over in Gateway Land are already at the leading edge of so many things. I think you should go try it and come back and tell us how it worked. Where Gateway goes, the rest follow.
That's kind. Hopefully we're going in a good direction. Yeah. Okay. Next up is the topology, traffic policy, everything in between discussion that I feel like has just gotten stuck in circles. And so I linked out to a cap, and Dan, thank you for having the PR, but I know it's been kind of overwhelmed with comments and discussion that are tangential in a way to what your original goal was. And so I don't know. I just know we're a couple weeks away from KEP freeze, and would love to figure out something for 127, whatever that means. And it seems like our current trajectory on that KEP is we need something to happen, and I don't know what that is. I have ideas on topology side. I don't know how to help move this idea forward. There's lots of different ideas together. I don't know.
So the original thing that KEP was supposed to do was to make it so that local traffic policy didn't cause services to break when endpoints moved around, which has been addressed by proxy terminating endpoints in the meantime. So the actual original feature of prefer local or node local topology, I care less about now, which is why I haven't been moving as very fast on this KEP. It kind of seems to me like the right answer is the thing that I was suggesting, where we integrate with that new pod scheduling topology feature that none of us had noticed before, and try to make services integrate with that. But yeah, I guess I don't have a really strong sense of how people are using topology, so I don't know for sure that I'm the best person to be pushing it forward now.
Yeah, no, that's helpful context. I hadn't even thought through that idea that terminating endpoints does solve a lot of those problems, or proxy terminating endpoints does. And I'm intrigued by the idea of using topology, like using topology spread constraints, I think is what it is for scheduling. But obviously the relationship between service and the pod configuration below service is not always clear. Like if every pod backing a service has completely different config, it gets, I don't know what you do. It sounds awful to try and make that connection. One of the things I've been thinking about, talking with a few people around this, I think it was Tim's idea to move topology a little bit closer to how scheduling works, in that there's pluggable heuristics, right? That you make it a sufficiently generic thing that somebody can bring their own heuristic and we can accept it, at least in an experimental state. So we're providing a system that enables others to plug and play what the custom logic that they think is most useful for them. Because right now we're we're using CPU, allocatable CPU as our ratio of, this is the approximate amount of traffic we expect this node to receive, and then we're trying to balance based on that, which is maybe accurate in some cases, but certainly not all. So yeah, that maybe what I'm hearing is we should actually just fold this. It sounds like the prefer local is something we don't actually need. Maybe we should just pull this all back into a topology related discussion and just say this is something that we'll explore as a pluggable form of topology, and kind of as the proof of concept that we can actually plug and play into the topology hint system. I don't know, Tim.
Yeah, I'm really torn on this one. And I was the voice of let's not do this at the beginning, and then I sort of came around because seems like there's enough people who just say, look, just give me the wheel, right? Give me the controls. That I shifted to being sort of not an enthusiastic endorser, but an endorser. And if we want to shift the conversation back to, hey, let's try fiddling with the heuristic more, which I agree we should do. I think that would be a great way to do it. That doesn't solve any problems that users have today, right? And it won't solve any problems that they have for quite a while. And so the question I have is, is it worth doing both? I don't generally like the answer of let's do both, but this feels like the break glass situation. Like, do we need to offer it? Is it worthwhile?
So which one are you suggesting dropping?
What are both? What are the two?
Making heuristics better and more pluggable, and also including an explicit prefer local or prefer zone policy. That's the both in my mind, right? Explicit versus heuristic.
That could make sense because one of the things I've been thinking about is just implementation detail, right? Policy, or whatever we want to call it, the idea of if there are any endpoints in the zone, route to them in the same zone, is something that's easy to implement without hints. You can look at the data plane and it can just implement that without any centralized control plane, anything. Anything beyond that, like a new heuristic in endpoint slice controller for hints, is probably going to be more focused on the ratio, or how we think we should, given this set of pods and this set of nodes, how should we distribute them? Which I guess that works too. I don't know. It's just.
Hey, I just jump in that slightly. I've been following a lot of these and tried to contribute some bad ideas. I thought this is so critical. It feels like I really like the idea of making this hint system better, making it so I can give my own metrics, similar to how the auto scaling went from these fixed metrics, and then you could bring your own, and suddenly the whole thing became way more powerful and way more useful. I think if I'm currently still on whatever cluster version still supports the topology keys, and I can't move until I have something that allows me to just say local zone region. And it sucks because I see all the cool stuff that you guys come up with and come out with, and I can't move. And I know I'm not alone in that from just other people I've spoken to. So I would really love to see an expansion of the hint system, making it better, making it more useful, bringing in custom metrics, all of that. I think that's great. I would really, really kindly ask that we try and put in a stopgap just so we can move and upgrade and stop this.
Yeah, and I mean, so I was saying before, I'm not totally up on the topology situation. And obviously you don't get people saying, yay, I love the status quo, yay, loudly in bug reports. But it definitely seems like there's nobody saying, I love the hint system, and there are a ton of people saying, I really want to be able to explicitly declare how topology works.
I don't. I mean, I agree with you that that's how it looks like, but I don't put a lot of stock in that as a signal because exactly what you said. People don't come on to say good job, right? We don't. This is not Amazon reviews where there's some incentive to come back and tell us that we did a nice job. I have anecdotal evidence that at larger scale the heuristics work great, right? And that's kind of what they're designed for. Like given enough machines with enough cores, the CPU heuristic sort of works out at relatively smaller scale. And Lawrence, I don't know how big your clusters are. And for anybody watching the recording, I didn't plan this with Lawrence at all. I don't know who he is or where he works or what he's working on, but thanks for chiming in. It's clear that at smaller scale, the CPU bias heuristic isn't really going to work.
Yeah. At smaller scale, the problem with any kind of automatic system is you run into very significant risk of overloading endpoints, right? And our system doesn't provide, the hints as it is today doesn't provide any way to define what acceptable risk is. And so we make a best guess, and that best guess is not working for a pretty large chunk of people, especially at the smaller scale.
I would say just kind of on the scale stuff, I think scale is interesting. So we've got clusters that are 30 nodes. We've got clusters that are getting bigger. I've tested this out to 90 and 120, which, I mean, I get this. Some people are way bigger, but it's not tiny. What's interesting is when you're spreading those nodes across loads of zones, because it's not really about your cluster side in terms of new, like pure node count. It's how many nodes do you have in each of these availability zones. Sorry, that's an overloaded term. I just mean zones. And so I think that's where this stuff starts to really hurt. And we're stretched thin when it comes to resources per zones. But I'll stop talking because I've made my point, and I promise I'll come back. Thank you.
Yeah, but
Heterogeneous clusters make it worse too, right? Like if all your nodes are not identical, then the problem is amplified.
But what I don't get in is, what is the best solution for you, Lawrence? The custom pluggable topology implementation?
So I need something that today allows me to say, I don't care about your heuristics. I know what I'm doing. I want you to go try the local node. If it's not there, try the zone. If it's not there, try the region. I'm using those three examples because those seem to be like primitives, like this isn't custom things I'm defining. These are like primitives in the API somewhere that's like well known and understood. If we get to a point where the metric stuff is really flexible and good, and I can extend it and control it and I really liked what you guys put in with 126 with the visibility and that kind of stuff. If we grow this feature out, then sure, I could totally imagine myself saying, actually, rather than just saying this bulletproof option that, runs into overload stuff that Hints was meant to try and fix, like if I can have enough control and insight into that feature, then maybe I would move to that. But it sounds like that's a long way away. And so I kind of want both, which I guess greedy, but.
Look, we'll have to wrap for time. We'll need to push forward. But my philosophy on this is largely unchanged, right? Users should not have to care about this. We should do the right thing as often as possible by default. It's clear that the heuristics that we put in place don't reach the level of efficacy that we'd like to see. It's scary to give users this level of control because we know that it will overload them and it will cause new issues to come back to us. And we're going to say, but I told you so, right?
That's one
anyway,
quick thing. But because this is related to the endpoint analysis starting things, depending on what level the user wants to touch, they can write their own endpoint analysis controller and do whatever they want. That's why I'm asking the level. I mean, if you are at the level that you can write your controller, you have it.
How does writing an endpoint slice controller help unless you're also writing a proxy?
No, that's the thing is, we're not writing, not talking about rewriting kubeproxy and this only works in kubeproxy. We're talking about designing a feature that has to be implemented for all the CNIs because people is going to use it in everywhere.
Technically, the
That's a
hint
good point.
system allows anyone to publish hints and them to be consumed by the underlying data plane. So it is, like Antonio was saying, you
But-
could just, I'm not saying anyone should write their own endpoint slice controller, but if you need ultimate customization, that is a
But
path
that only-
available to you.
we only have hints for zones, right? We don't have a for node zone or a hint.
Correct.
So even if Lawrence wanted to go off and do this, which I don't think is the best answer, he couldn't achieve what he really wants. Right. But Antonio's point is true. If we say we're going to add this policy, then we're imposing that on all kube proxy-ish implementations, at least until Kaping takes over the world. And so we will have to go back to our friends at Cilium and our friends at Calico and our friends at Oven and say, hey, what do you guys think about this implementation or this API rather? Could you build this implementation? Sorry, I just see that Per has his hand up.
Yeah,
Per, did you want to say something?
So I mean, so like I said, what are you scheduling over, right? I mean, we have a lot of resources that sits in FPGAs and other things, and once you start trying to look at all sort of loads, it gets extremely complicated and non-implementable. So sort of it's really tough to do this in the load balancer. I mean, traditionally we looked at CPU load or number of connections, right? But I mean, to do it in a way where you can detail control this that works for everyone, I think it will become so complicated that it will not work. So we need to find something that's simple and sort of.
One second, guys. If we can, potentially have to table this one just so we can get to our other agenda items.
Yeah.
So I don't know, Rob, I know you had one more,
Yeah.
but we also have Antonio and he has a 10 to 15 minute slot. So we're already overlapping on him.
Oh,
Yeah, I'll hand it off to Antonio. If there's time, we can come back.
Sorry about that, Rob.
okay. Let me present. So this is, when you have this week, but every
Antonio, are you talking? We can't hear you.
You muted yourself,
Yeah.
Antonio.
Sharing the screen by default mutes the sound because it thinks your screen is going to present some sound. I don't know. It's under the share options. I don't know where it is in your Zoom client, but there's a share option that's like unmute on share or something.
now you can hear
Now
me,
we
right?
can hear you. Yep.
There
Yeah.
you are.
And you can see the screen. Okay.
Yep.
So this is the way that you get one issue and everything is the same issue. So this was my contract week and I saw contract issues everywhere. The last one was because of the kubelet props. So several people asked me to explain the problem. So I decided to put in a presentation and share it here. For some of you, this is going to be obvious. Maybe some things are wrong. So bear with me. This is about why contract entries are still in the table, are not removed, and why it takes 60 seconds to a connection to free the resources. If we see a node in a system in Kubernetes or in whatever place, we have usually these common resources that are the memory, the CPU, the storage, or the network. Network as bandwidth or.
So Antonio, you're talking TCP in this case, right?
Yeah. It's high level, so don't be picky. Okay, so if we move to Kubernetes, the node actually converts in a router. The node is no longer a system, an operating system. It's a bunch of it's an operating system that has also another small operating system then inside, and it has to route. Then, in addition to the common resources that we have as RAM, CPU, storage, and network, we now have to deal with the network resources. Typically, is ephemeral ports for all the connections that we create in the node, file descriptors for the same connections, and the contract table. The contract table is going to limit us the number of connections that we can handle in this system. Okay, and there are several options in the kernel that allows us to tune these systems. If we see in this diagram, these are the places where the packets hit these resources. So when you are generating a connection, you go from the local process, you take an ephemeral port, and when you traverse the output, you generate a contract entry. The same when a packet is coming externally or from a pod, you hit the contract entry in this pre-routing places, and the packet move forwards.
Antonio, we just see red arrows to nothing.
Oh, okay. So I don't know
There
why
we
it's
go.
not working.
We got it. Now it's there.
Now it's there.
Okay.
The famous diagram.
Well, it's a typical diagram of the network stack. Nothing. It's just the common stuff. You most sure that all of you know this better than me. Okay. So this is how the contract entries are generated, and now we need to understand how once the connection is created, how the socket frees the resources. So when you finish the connection, the operating system still waits during a certain period that by the RPC, whatever thing is the double maximum segment lifetime. That I think that in Linux is 60 seconds by default. This is the time that the operating system keeps the socket open despite the connection has finished. Okay. And this parameter cannot be overridden with. It has to be. I think this is a constant in the kernel. You have to recompile the kernel if you want to change that. So the reason because I say this is because when kubelet does probes and it connects to a TCP port, it's a very ephemeral connection. It takes less than a second usually, but then it as you can see in the graph, it generates a contract entry and it generates a socket, and you can see that the socket has a timer. In this case, it has a 49 seconds timer. And if you try to do another connection reusing the same port, this is going to fail. But it means that this port cannot be allocated anymore for using more connections.
Well, it's not the port, right? You cannot generate the same connection. If you go to another destination, you can still use that port. Or
the source port. Okay, the thing is in the source port, source IP. You cannot use the same source IP.
Or source address. The whole 5 tuple needs to be.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. And then what happens? The problem is that when the kubelet has to probe a lot of pods, you need to generate a lot of these connections. Okay, so this is an example. If you create 100 replica, this is in the same node. Okay, this is an edge case, a limit case. It's not common, but in some clusters you can see these things. Okay, and if you have a lot of probes, you have a lot of these connections. And if you have a small period, you have a lot of small connections that are going to take 60 seconds to recycle. And what they do is they create this funny contract table for you. You can see that you have a lot of stale entries in time wait. So in addition to the ephemeral ports, you are also consuming contract entries. The maths are the following. So we have the default configuration in a Linux system is that you have about 28,000 ephemeral ports. The contract table by kubeproxy, I don't know how this value is. I don't know if it's dynamic or not. I think that is based on CPU. But in my system, we have 200,000 entries for contract. So if we put a case in that you have 100 pods with 3 containers and 1 probe per container, it means that you are going to have 300 probes. If you have a very small time period for these probes, this is going to generate 300 requests per second. Because we have this time wait, we are not going to start to recycle these entries until this 60 seconds timeout ends. So it means that during these 60 seconds, we are going to exhaust this 17,000 ports. That is more than half of the ephemeral ports.
So why do they close? Why not keep the connection open and probe over it over and over again? Why set up a new connection?
Let me finish.
Okay,
It's
sorry.
just only two more sentences and I finish. Okay, and the other thing is, in addition, the node team wants to add a sub-second probe cap. Okay, that this can go at the millisecond period. Okay, that makes it come. The solution that I came up is to use the soul ingot socket that allows you to override per socket this time wait. So after 1 second, you just recycle. The other option, as per se, is to reuse. With TCP in Golang, I don't know how to do it for the probes. With HTTP, I added it and it failed miserably because the Golang standard library behaves differently and there are some weird interactions that I don't know what is going on.
There is one other way that you can do as well, and that is sort of that in the kubelet, instead of letting the system assign ephemeral ports, that you go and grab a number of ephemeral ports and then you use them yourself, because you can use the same port when you go to all the probes. So if you say you're going to do 300 probing during X minutes, you can use the same ephemeral port out to all of them because they're going to have a different IP address. So instead of doing a connect with 0 as the source port, you do connect with the source port set to a port that you have grabbed. And that way you don't get this problem. That's sort of I used before.
Okay, that's another interesting idea. We had several bugs in the kernel because of that.
Because that can be done in the kubelet sort of only, right? And then it will basically, for every time it's going to do a probe, do an ephemeral port. I mean, do something that grabs a port and then use that port number for all the probing in that sort of epoch of probing.
But can you extrapolate that to all the systems? I mean, what is
because every container you're going to go to has a different IP address, right? Or you go to a different IP address and different port in them. You're not going to send 2 probes to the same destination address and destination port unless you go over the service. That's different. But I mean, if you go directly on the container, you will not.
Yeah, but probes allows to specify any IP address. That's another problem. It's not. It's not a strict validation, so it's very loose. So you can also specify public IPs.
Public IPs, the same thing, right?
No, I mean that's the thing is that
it's a kubelet that's responsible. I mean, it's the sender that's responsible for making sure that the 5 tuple is unique. So as long as no one else is using the same source port on that system, you can write all that stuff in the sending process yourself. I've done it for a whole system. I mean, in the kernel to reuse the usage of the ports. So it's, you know what? I'll do this offline with you. I will.
Yeah, that's
not
a good
take
idea.
a lot of time here.
Cool.
I don't know what.
Oh, sorry, Antonio. I stepped on your.
No. That's a good idea. An interesting idea.
Yeah.
I'm happy to share this.
It's just a way to sort of let the client itself take over the responsibility for uniqueness of the connection from the underlying kernel. You do it yourself.
One thing I'll say is I looked at Antonio's PR and I was surprised at how not complicated it was. Now apparently it doesn't work, so maybe that doesn't mean much. But like the SO linger part of it was like 5 lines of code, which is a huge reduction in this problem. It's not a perfect solution, but for 5 lines of code, I think I'll take it.
Yeah, the other one will take a sort of a hash table. But SO linger is good enough, probably.
The current PR with SO linger didn't work?
Yeah,
Maybe
that's
we
it
can
was.
fix that.
The problem is that I was too ambitious and I wanted to do everything.
Okay.
The linger and the reuse and blah blah blah. And
Got
then
it.
when it started to fail and simplify it, and it has only the linger and it's very simple. So if
Okay.
you can take a look,
Yeah, I took a look this morning and that's why I was a little confused because it looked really simple to me. And then Tim was like, it doesn't work.
because Tim got the first draft. And
Got it.
My first draft are always ugly.
Sweet deal. I actually have to leave because I have another meeting. We are at time. Great discussion. Sounds like we have carryover for Rob, further on discussions with multi-network and discussions with Antonio's PR. So awesome. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording